Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to try to do a screen share here and get you all onto, we'll get our presentation going. Hopefully you see some colorful graphics.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you. Tonight, the purpose of this item is to provide an update on the Middle Housing Code project and get some directions from Council on a couple of needed issues that we need to have incorporated into some of the Planning Commission deliberations, as well as into the final recommendations on the code. As a recap, for those who may be joining us in this conversation, middle housing, AKA the missing middle, is a category of homes which are commonly characterized by duplexes, triplexes, townhouses, cottage clusters, and courtyard housing. Generally, these houses are considered smaller alternatives to our single family dwellings, but intended to be compatible in the size and scale with single family or traditional neighborhoods. This project in particular has its roots in the housing needs analysis from 2015, which is incorporated into our comp plan, as well as some TGM, transportation and growth management work that was done in 2018. It made its way onto the council work plan in 2020. Earlier this year, the project was launched with some advertisements and outreach that went through our project specific webpage, through some social media outreach, as well as some publications in the city's newsletter in both English and Spanish. We also had a couple meetings with Planning Commission to discuss the item, and this is, I've been to council a couple times to bring you up to speed. Earlier this year, and following up with some of that outreach, staff and its consulting team began to work through some of the housing prototypes and some of the code work that we're going to really be used as guidance to make amendments to the city code and the zoning code in order to increase the opportunity for some smaller, more compact development. And then on December 21st, Planning Commission began its technical review of the code and some of the mechanics into the code itself. These included issues such as the setbacks, height requirements, landscaping, discussions on limitation of unit sizes in order to, or intended to promote some more affordable design or affordable products. The use of design elements, off-street parking requirements, as well as the impact of frontage when it came to driveways and access points. And as you can see on your slide, we're here in the feedback loop. So Planning Commission has started some of its work, but prior to coming back to council with our proposed and recommended framework, where you will have the opportunity to conduct your own public hearing, take your testimony, and take the final action on the code. We are looking for some direction on two areas in particular: parking requirements that are included in the code, and another area that kind of generally becomes categorized as compatibility, scale, and marketability rolled into one. And we'll get into those here in a minute. But before we jump into parking, if you have any questions, I'd take them now.
Dustin, this is Tim. So you're saying that there's a couple of questions, one related to parking, and the other one was related to what was that again?
Kind of scale and marketability, size.
So are these different than the significant questions that are on page 18?
These are the significant questions. Oh, in your packet, I'm sorry.
Right.
Related, you're discussing the 7 that were included in the Sarah Architects memo?
Yep.
They overlap.
They overlap.
So some of those questions are, are I think have been addressed in the code and are really on the resolved issue. These are the two that I think are most outstanding and that we need some council direction on in order to continue to evaluate this.
Thank you.
So moving right, if that's all, we'll move right into the parking.
I think Gladys might have, did you have your hand up, Gladys? Oh, okay. All right. Go ahead, Dustin.
Pretty customary with the middle housing review is a look at parking and parking requirements. Commonly, looked at because middle housing is intended to be more affordable, a smaller product, and made and developed consistently with a lot of infill housing types in areas that really, as you heard before, actually earlier tonight, were laid out and built without our current parking requirements. So what we've heard to date and what we've heard is from Planning Commission as well as members of the public is to be mindful of the amount of parking you do put in place. Make sure that we're not adding parking at the expense of some open space development, to be mindful and allow the market to do its work. But also to be very mindful of Hood River's circumstance and our typical vehicle and lifestyle choices, and some limited transportation options, as well as the request to don't succumb to the same narrative as we state we want to develop something different and diversify our housing stock. Don't continue to do the same thing. Don't continue to ask for the same requirements. So as staff and hearing some of those things, we've really been trying to blend the needs of Hood River and really keep true to the goals of providing some of these smaller housing types. So really you end up with a parking scenario where the concern of adding parking will drive up our unit sizes and the cost of these dwellings. We'll take away from on-street parking, will occupy a greater amounts of area that could be used for dwelling units or for dwelling in buildable area as well as landscape area. To the contrary of that, with the understanding that parking reduction, when we don't see or any real behavioral changes for us who drive cars and who drive to work, who rely on these vehicles, we should anticipate that additional on-street parking demands will be realized. That as more users rely on the on-street parking system, most likely requiring greater management or some street design considerations, allowing or providing for on-street parking or reducing the amount of access so that we maximize our parking requirements. Currently, our code for our middle housing types, be it duplex, triplex, cottage, will require 2 spaces per dwelling unit. That's what the existing municipal code requires for each of them, regardless of the size, whether it's 800 square feet, whether it's 8,000, you're at 2 spaces per dwelling unit. And again, we've seen this increase dwelling size. We're in our code, we've looked at the impacts of this on really the number of garages, the amount of curb space that we end up eroding, and the amount of front yards, as illustrated here on the in your city examples of what happens when you start loading, a lot of cars off street. So the proposed draft in your packet really assumes a minimum of requirement of 1 off-street space per dwelling unit, which represents a reduction from the current standard, but is not so aggressive as it ignores the reality that we will either have people who rely on their vehicles or we have people who will rely on their garages for storage. But ideally, it's paired with the standards to reduce the amount of curb cuts, to share access points, and to keep some on-street parking available. So before we continue to work on the code, this is really where we as staff, we need some council direction on here. Generally, is we're looking to see if council is generally supportive of the reduction. And if not, we will need to take some action on our side to make code adjustments and to do some revisions to our code work and the prototypes and explore some other options. So with that, I can take a pause, and if there's any council feedback on that regarding this reduction and this proposed reduction for this housing type.
Dustin, I have one question. So you're talking about duplexes, triplexes, and cottages. You're not talking about apartments or multifamily units bigger than 4. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's
Okay.
where the multifamily is where our code changes. And we require, other than downtown, which just had its recent amendment, it's 1.5 dwelling units for a multifamily development.
Okay, 1.5 spaces per.
Excuse me. Yes, 1.5
Okay.
spaces per unit.
Okay, all right.
I
So
missed that. What's when does it switch from 1.5 to 1?
Once you have 4 or more dwellings in a building.
On a lot.
Well, it's multifamily.
Okay. Which is a different beast, right? So
Yes.
so would regular, one house on an R2 or one house on an R1 still be at 2 then? And so this sort of would be an incentive to do the smaller footprint?
Yeah. Yes. That's this is starting to become embedded in
Marketability now.
yeah, what hopefully becomes 1725, its own chapter related to middle housing.
Another question, since I can't see anyone and Kate couldn't see me waving around like a crazy person.
No,
All of the form-based drawings have parking on the inside, which reduces curb cuts. Is there a quantitative improvement of on-street, linear feet of on-street parking compared to, a typical cut per home? So I guess I'm saying it's not really. It used to be 2 and now it's 1. It used to be 2, but we'd lose a bunch on the street for the curb cuts, and now it's 1 on site and there's only 1 curb cut. So it's equivalent to something in between probably.
Yeah. And I think that's where I think I mentioned the importance of sharing access points.
Right.
The idea of hopefully, in the way they're designed is you're seeing one access for all the units. So if you end up with a cottage cluster of 6 units, they have 1 access point. So the idea, this came up with our ADUs, if you required 1 space and they put it right off the street and you take away 1 parking space, that's a net. We call that the net zero negative if you consider you used to have a public parking space and now you have just 1 private parking space.
Well, can that be a thing that if you have 1 driveway for 4 spots, it's 1, but if you insist on building something that has 4 driveways for 4 cottages, you're back to 2?
I think we've kind of dialed this into, you have 1, we're only allowing 1.
1 curb cut. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So that's you've good.
Yeah, we've kind of eliminated the discussion of curb cuts by really forcing consolidated access points. Some of the prototypes, and I think one of them that is still in there but is dubbed discarded, shows the impact on lot coverage as well as impact of street parking when we started seeing more and more curb cuts occur. And I think this is, the picture that I have up kind of provides that illustration as well, especially to the right where you see 2 cars parked on street. This is a pretty good typical Hood River of, we have 2 garages, 2 cars parked on street, and a loss of all the parking on the street side versus a unit with no parking out front, and probably just as many parking spaces on street.
So it makes it easier to get more units on that lot because you don't have as many vehicles required.
Yeah, and that's some of the trade-offs. You know, it's a minimum mandatory, setting the minimum at 1. It doesn't state that if somebody wanted to market their product else to something else, they wouldn't have the opportunity to do more. But it's not setting the 2 dwelling unit ceiling, or 2 dwelling unit per unit right now, regardless of size. So.
Gladys, did you have your hand up? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. So Dustin, for me, I'm okay to reduce parking spaces for sure. And would this be the only incentive for a developer to want to build the, cluster and all that, the middle code housing as opposed to the townhouses? Is this the only incentive?
No, this is one of them. I think we're going to talk about one more coming up next, but I think the idea that we're trying to incentivize some of this by providing an opportunity to build more smaller units, more compact units, rather than fewer larger ones. But that does go along with the parking aspect of making parking commensurate with that, and also, if you're over parking it or requiring more parking, that is a disincentive. So.
More questions for Dustin? Megan? And then Tim.
Yeah, Dustin, are townhouses part of the missing middle? Would they go down to 1 space per unit?
So typically they're categorized in the canon of missing middle. We don't have them included within this chapter. So a full-scale townhouse that is built basically under the current townhouse regulations, which I believe is 1719 of the code and follows that rules, wouldn't be reduced.
Okay, because yeah, I guess on my end, I see the value in reducing a disincentive or adding an incentive to do these smaller missing middle types, but especially given our second conversation, I would hate to add an incentive to do more of these townhomes if that's already where the incentive is. So it sounds like that's already not an issue, so thank you.
Yeah, the code intentionally kind of bifurcates the kind of smaller compact, although similar could be attached to the large format, really the typical townhouse that we see now.
Tim, did you have a question?
Thanks, Mayor. One of the things that I was wondering is, obviously the capacity for neighborhoods to absorb on-street parking is not going to be the same across neighborhoods. Or maybe it is. Maybe there's enough on-street parking right now for it to absorb everything. Do you have a feel for that? I mean, it seems like we're talking in really vague terms about trying to not make it so bad, but not really having an idea specifically of what the implications are.
Well, I think in general across the board, you're going to see, the demand for on-street parking, again, without the behavioral change across the board, will go up. We haven't done an analysis of all the neighborhoods and how they fare and what their parking absorption is, similar to what we did downtown, where we looked at what was, we did kind of a parking analysis and backed into a number on what the rate was. We haven't done that for individual neighborhoods here.
Right. Would that be, as you proceed through approving all of these changes and potentially a variety of different developments in a particular neighborhood, it seems like something you'd want to keep track of, right?
Yeah, and that's where, I think I mentioned that the idea of parking management becomes an issue, or it becomes an option to regulate parking in areas that become increasingly congested. So if we did started to experience congestion and parking, the current code does allow residential to get into their some residential parking enforcement options. That's already in the code. We haven't seen anyone really take it up, but that is on the books and it is an option now.
Right. I noticed in your descriptions of the various housing types that you have lot coverage percentages, so on and so forth. It might be useful as an argument going forward if there were some type of comparison between one parking scenario requiring 2 spaces and requiring 1 space. I don't want to make it onerous or anything. I'm just thinking that it might be an interesting, powerful statistic. Also, with respect to the curb cuts, if you could kind of coarsely estimate the reduction in curb cuts and produce that as a statistic, that might be an interesting thing to do. There's things that would provide some concrete examples of the benefits of taking a particular course.
I think beyond that, I think our prototypes start to break down. Right? If it becomes a lot coverage issue, it becomes your dwelling unit bonuses and smaller compacts really start to unravel. For example, your cottage, the 6-unit cottage that you have in there, adding 6 more spaces onto what is a 10,000 square foot lot just doesn't become a coverage issue. It becomes a non-starter. So, and that's part of the reason why I'm here is if we need to go back and look at this, we can. I mean, I can do the numbers on it. If I add 2,000 square feet roughly of a parking space on there for another 6 units, or I could easily do the estimate on that. So,
But
Well, I
you were
think it's
saying
important.
it won't work. I mean, there'd be no way that you could do that many units. I mean, it would just doesn't function.
unless you start going up, unless you start going vertical, yeah, we run out of real estate.
Yeah.
But
And
I'd be happy to do some mathematics for you.
other questions? Mark? And then Jessica?
You just mentioned going up. I see that all these drawings are detached configurations. A, are there attached configurations? And B, can you do 2 on top of each other and have more open space is an option within this rule set. So take one of your 6 housing configurations. Could it be 3 2-stories and a tree?
Yeah, most of them are intended to have the opportunity to be attached and detached. It does, when they become attached, they start freeing up some more real estate because of they don't have side yards, or they lose 1 side yard.
Right.
In terms of vertical, it is an option. I think we were, as the code folks, less high on that because of probably some limitations on condo development and difficulties of just seeing that happen as compared to ground level units. But it's a possibility, including actually in your packet, one of the 3 flats shows a duplex, a stacked duplex, and a single cottage. That's a vertical stack that really reduces some of the real estate. But I just think we're not intentionally avoiding that, but I think the likelihood of that getting built and us getting stacked units becomes, it's just going to be a challenge on the marketplace to see it delivered.
Yeah, and my goal isn't to say that's a good thing or a bad thing. It's just give maximum flexibility to the builders to get creative and find solutions. So if we've ruled it out, it's one less thing that they can play with. I guess that's my point.
Yeah, I think we were looking at this as length, width, and height, limiting really the overall bulk, not necessarily how they're configured within it.
And the code will give them that flexibility.
Yeah.
More
Thanks.
questions? Jessica, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just not really a question, but I guess just to say in general that I am supportive of reducing the parking and basically letting the market build that parking if that is what a developer thinks they're going to need. If they think it's going to need more parking, then they can build that. I also, some of the examples were, if it's 1.5 over a certain size, and I'm okay with that. I don't know what that size would be, but I am okay with this as proposed as well.
Okay. Good. That's extremely helpful.
Gladys? I think
I'm
Gladys
sorry.
had did you have a question, Gladys?
Yeah, I do. So Dustin, you were talking about, it would be challenging to build up. First of all, just thank you for all these visuals here. I am a visual learner and I really appreciate seeing that. But I would really like to see, even though I imagine it would be challenging, I don't think it's impossible. So I would still like to look at other options as well, even just going up instead of, going out to the sides. Yeah, that was it.
Tim?
Thanks, Mayor. I guess kind of getting back to a point that was brought up in public comment. Are there developers reviewing these? Are they looped into this at all? Are you seeking input from them about, we were having a lot of discussions about marketability and buildability.
Yes, there's been a couple people who we've been in conversation with, both local developers as well as going through our consultant, who's a professional architecture firm in Portland, to try to broaden that reach. There's, and the marketability question that we talked about generally came from that group, from real estate and development team. So there's that's been some of the commentary, and we have been outreaching with them. So,
and one brief follow up that I think reducing the parking requirements makes sense, but it would be great to go into that with our eyes wide open and aware of the consequences and appetite for particular neighborhoods to absorb that type of pressure.
and that's the full disclosure part of what we wanted to speak to, is that this could, just like, not like dissimilar to the conversations downtown, this management and stress on street is a realistic possibility if we don't see behavior change.
Yeah, I'm for reducing the numbers personally, especially for small units. If you're going to have a 400 square foot unit or 800 square foot unit, if your unit's going to end up being 1,200 to 1,500 square feet, then maybe it should be 1.5. Or if it's a large frontage, for instance, if you had a 10,000 square foot lot and you had a large frontage on the street and you had larger units, then, you could see, well, we've got one small curb cut and there's quite a bit of opportunity for people to park on the street. So I think just taking those things into consideration, and, like Gladys had mentioned, going up, I'm not against going up, depending. I mean, I know we have apartments and they can go up. I know we have multifamily and they can go up. And whether some of these could be taller, but not be a 5,000 square foot house, but to be a 1,500 square foot or a 1,400 square foot. So we could get more units on, but maybe 1.5 spaces per unit would be required. So in general, I'm fine with going with a smaller number of parking spaces. I think I heard Megan. What are your thoughts? I think I've heard everyone else what they're thinking about. You know, smaller parking requirements were okay, but what were your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I'm definitely willing to try out the 1 space per unit. You know, it sounds like at least in this draft stuff, they're all definitely smaller units. And you know, I guess looking at the pictures, which again, yes, are definitely helpful. Seems like it's kind of necessary if we actually want to get these units built.
Okay. And I want to acknowledge that we received some written testimony this afternoon, because I know sometimes, you know, if we don't mention it, people wonder, well, what the heck, did you even read what I said? It might not be what we are coming up with as we speak tonight. But rest assured, all the written comments that came in today, we all got those and we're able to read those today regarding this subject. Have you got your input you need, Dustin, on that then?
I did. If we're ready to move on to my next issue.
That'd be great.
So this one, again, kind of gets back to the scale compatibility issue. Scaling missing middle housing or middle housing to be compatible with the existing neighborhoods and promoting the smaller dwelling units are really part and essential to the project goals. And the draft code has been built to limit the size of the dwellings, not necessarily by setting a ceiling, but rather through setbacks, height limitations, requiring open spaces. So this is again, working and intending to develop a smaller unit package. So through that, the townhouse product, as we mentioned, they're also considered a part of middle housing, not necessarily in our code, but we regulate them through a different part of the zoning code. Yet the townhouse code will allow units and building that is considerably larger in scale, what we anticipate coming out of the middle housing code. And with its overall size really being equal to a single family home by code, the townhouse market has been set to be pretty competitive, or the development community has stated it's really competitive and set to be competitive with the single family homes. This size discrepancy has been identified as an issue, not only for the purposes of compatibility, but also because it's perceived, has been identified as a disincentive that will negatively impact a developer's willingness to build a missing middle or smaller dwelling unit type. If you look at the code I have up here, if you go to the bottom line, which is no pun intended, the bottom line of a townhouse in our R2 development shows that you can yield between about 3,700 and 5,500 square feet of dwelling, whether you do 2 and 3 or 3 stories, which today, based on the land unit price, we always see 3. We see the max. We anticipate the max. It's measured within inches. But on a similar middle housing type, even though you have 3 dwelling units, we're seeing about 1,800 square feet of developed area. And I have another illustration here. Let's point in the R3 zone to the same, excuse me. Back to the bottom line of the slide, the difference between an R3 development, you see our townhouse development, 3 dwelling units, 3 stories, yielding about 7,000 square feet. On this larger format site, this is a 10,000 square foot prototype, you see it really starting to yield a little more comparable outcome. 5,200 square feet, still less, but more in line to what we're experiencing.
You're
So-
talking about total square footage of all living space, of
That's
all the units, okay.
That's correct. Total living space, all units, some assumptions taken out for parking, because we have they all do require some amount of parking. So with the draft code intended to provide more compact units, and as illustrated in these slides, we do see some varying degrees in building gaps. So my question for council is here, do you support narrowing the gap through adjustments to the middle housing code, or some other means? Really, we're talking about this code now, and looking for your feedback on the gap. And
So
what-
my question, Dustin, is for clarification of what you're asking us. We currently allow what's on the left of our screen. You're asking about proposing what's on the right of our screen. Are you saying proposing it in addition to what is on the left, or eliminating what is on the left?
Oh, no, this would be, well, you could close the gap through a couple ways. You could adjust the middle housing up to allow more development. And that's really the intent of this code, is to look at this code. In another way, you could take the opportunity to go back and reduce the townhouse size if you wanted to narrow the gap. Those are two options of reducing that.
So have you talked to developers about this? Because they still want to build what's on the left. Do they also want to build what's on the right, and even more than they would want to build what's on the left? Or do you know?
I think that what is on the left is the preferred product right now. Because
Right, but we don't have the code for what's on the right yet. But once we get the code, do you think it will be just as preferred as what's on the left?
I think I share the concern that if there's too much of a gap between the two, they won't embrace it. It has to be, it doesn't have to be apples for apples. It doesn't have to be 7,000 square feet, every foot counts, but it has to be within the range. So,
And that is because you get, if you build 7,000 square feet, you're going to get, $250 per square foot. And if you're building 7,000 square feet, you're going to get more money. If you're only building 4,000 square feet of whatever, you're going to get less money. Is that what you're saying?
it's close. I think your item on the left is, let's say, for example, you build 7,000 square feet, and this ends up being $300 a square foot. More than likely, the item on the right becomes a more expensive square foot by square foot, but you end up with less size. So if you add a dwelling unit, so this is 5 to the left, 6 to the right, you're able to make up for that to some extent. So you can sell 6 dwelling units, not 5. But if you have so there's a little compensation there. There's a little parity in the marketplace. You don't 7,000.
You get more units, but you have to build more bathrooms and build more kitchens and build more parking.
And that goes on to the consumer. I mean, that is passed on. The other places, right. Both real estate, both lots cost the same.
Yeah,
you have to.
The land's the same price. Right.
You don't get a discount if you're going to build smaller units when it comes to the land basis. So that also plays into some of the marketplace choices. When you're buying a lot for $250,000 and up, they're gonna make choices based on what their return is on that.
So you're saying if we don't limit the townhouse size, then the numbers won't come in close enough to incentivize people to do what's on the right. Is that what you're saying?
I don't think it's just limiting townhouse size. It's also providing some upward adjustment to the middle code, to making sure that they're a little balanced.
You mean square footages? Instead of saying they have to be 900 square feet or less, we should maybe say they have to be 1,100 or 1,200 square feet or less. Is that what you're saying?
Right, or just,
Okay.
right.
Okay. Just trying to clarify what you're saying here. Sorry about that.
Sorry.
Okay.
So-
No.
The intent is to still stay within the range, maintain the goal of smaller units, and still, operating under the assumption that we're going to build, that developers are going to build the max. So if we put a ceiling on 1,100 square feet, I believe I'm going to see 1,100 square foot dwelling units. That's a reality I think that we see in our marketplace. So.
And this drawing on the right, where we have 6 units separated, they could be three units and 3 units attached.
Correct.
Okay, which would help with some open space, more open space.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, you will have an open space benefit. You could also have a square footage benefit too.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Additional questions, Megan?
Yeah, Dustin, I just don't know this, but does our current townhouse code, can you build that same size single family dwelling if someone wanted to, or does it allow more building than a single family home?
It allows, essentially the numbers are about the same when it comes to coverage and height. Those are the 2 determining factors. So our townhouse, all things equal, a townhouse against a single family home, the same volume and mass can occur. The changes become a townhouse code will allow you to do 2 dwelling units. So splitting the lot and allow you to split the lot in half and allow you to do 2 dwelling units under the same volume assumptions.
Okay, so how is it, if your single family homes can be as big as these townhomes, how is our compatibility standard for these missing middle housing types requiring them to be significantly smaller?
Well, I think that's the challenge is you want to remain compact. You want to split them up and add the dwelling units. I think in this scenario that you have before you, they're smaller, but they're still within a kind of the range. And there's other prototypes that have come across much smaller, and that has raised the issue. So they're all comparatively smaller than the townhouse.
I guess I'm not understanding why.
Why?
Yeah.
It's because that's a code that we're making. We're going to make a code that says, if you want to build this many, they have to be this small. Is that correct?
Yes. And we'll allow you to build more of them. So the height requirement and the compatibility of a townhouse has somewhat been challenged. And that shows up in a reduced height on this product. The current requirements for landscaping, there are none. That shows up as a goal in this requirement to require landscaping.
But single family homes on the same lot don't need to do any of that.
Correct.
So it incentivizes single family big homes still,
Right.
to some extent, yes.
So, and that is with your townhome look, if you wanted to look at that, you could also look at single family. And that's kind of the mention that we heard before is should you be incentivizing this even more, making it more, adding the size requirement for more dwelling units.
Tim, did you have a question? And then Jessica.
Yes, thanks, Mayor. Yeah, this is it is kind of confusing. I assume that making them smaller is really kind of is equating to making them more affordable, or is the intent really to just increase the number of houses and the number of dwellings and thereby reduce the cost of housing in Hood River. Is that how this is addressing that?
Yeah, a smaller unit, all things equal, the intent is to be a more affordable unit.
Mm-hmm.
All things equal, an 1,100 square foot dwelling unit is cheaper than a 1,800 square foot dwelling unit.
Yeah.
And then further, that by allowing more of those to be built on the same amount of land, again, this is back to the land basis, the real estate doesn't become any cheaper. So if you're able to do more smaller units, they're intended to be more cost effective because they're smaller. And also you could spread the cost of infrastructure, frontage improvements, and that land across a greater number of units, also addressing an affordability issue.
And so now all this is going to pencil out for the developer and make it worth their while to do that.
That's the intent.
Yeah, that is the intent.
So Dustin, is there any way, I mean, when I look at these pictures, I like the pictures, thank you. But it looks so monotypic. Is there any way to accommodate, like incentivizing like diversity of housing types and sizes on a particular parcel? Is that something that's been considered?
Well, we definitely considered some size averaging in it. I think we were looking at this as really kind of organization in the number of dwelling units and how to accomplish it. I don't think we've ever thought about a disincentive to blend housing type, whether you wanted an 800 or next to a 600, next to 1,200. I think that is something that we would encourage by averaging the house size.
Right. But is there an incentive in place to have a developer want to do that?
There's no incentive. It's allowed.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, I guess I'll rephrase it. Can there be an incentive?
To mix? Sure. There could be an incentive to that.
Because you could have a smaller housing types on a particular parcel that might be more affordable to in general.
Yeah.
And potentially, you could say there would be an incentive because you could say, well, I'm going to do all 400 square foot studios. And so maybe you could get more on there because square footage wise, you could just get more units, but then you're definitely going to, if you have that many more units, you're going to have more parking too. So, it's all a calculation. It's all an exercise on paper to figure out what you can do. I think. Anything else, Tim? I think Jessica, did you have a question or did you have something else, Tim?
No, I'm just trying to figure out what the decision point is here for us, or for the planning commission, I guess, as it were.
Okay, Jessica?
Well, so the question right now is, do we want to tweak the townhouses because what we're talking about is still not going to incentivize people to develop the middle housing? And I think the answer is yes. Dustin's shown us a couple pictures today to show how the townhouses are not very consistent with the neighborhoods. I think we've all seen examples where you're like, oh my God, that thing is gigantic compared to the little house next door. So I agree with Dustin's idea of reducing the gap between what's allowed in the townhouse and what's allowed in the middle housing square footage. I don't know what that is, but that's why we have Dustin in the planning commission. I was going to say that, Megan's question about, well, what if we don't change the single family housing? I think that, and maybe this is not true at all, but it seems to me that a speculative developer would still be interested in developing more units on a lot than one really big house. So like, let's say you could still build one really big house or two smaller townhouses or, you know, multiple middle housing things. It seems to me like not a lot of them would go towards the one really big house. So I don't necessarily see that we need to go all the way to just incentivizing the one really big house as well, if we're just focusing on the townhouses, bringing somehow the scale of the townhouses down and maybe the missing middle up.
Okay, Mark, and then Gladys.
With tons of respect for Jessica, I'm concerned that if we disincent their current profit margin for the townhouse and the tiny house is even any less of an incentive, they're just going to build big houses. I think that, you know, it's just a bottom line biz, and so that I would rather see us say, okay, what other sugar can we add to the small house, whether it's a little bit more square footage, like you said, or a little more flexibility in how you configure, you know, so if you have, you know, 7,000 square feet that you can build into 6 houses, or 6,000 square feet you can build into 5, and, you know, or some schedule like that, that gives them the flexibility to stack within height limits, or lay them out the way that you're talking about, or attach or detach, or however they want to do it to meet the market demand. I think that otherwise we'll just keep getting more of what we got. I do think that there's other carrots that we could use, maybe outside of this code. I mean, we can talk about, you know, we already talked about parking. That's a carrot. You know, maybe there's SDC carrots or road carrots, or, you know, some other things that further make the multifamily, you know, the cottage pencil out. But.
So
Gladys?
Yeah, to some extent, a little bit of what Mark and Jessica said. I would like to limit the size of the townhomes, because what we have now are the $500,000+ homes right now, and that's the townhomes that Dustin showed us on the left. What I'd like to see us get to is, you know, option B, the 6 units on the left, where, as Mark said, we offer so many carrots that it would be insane to refuse to want to build more of the cottage style, that kind of housing on the right as opposed to the left. So that's where I'd like to see us get to.
I'd like to see us get to the, you know, more units on a lot, and, you know, between 400 and I'm even up to 1,500 square foot. You know, that's a pretty big range, but I think that's a range that we don't have, because I think we have a lot of 15 to 2,000 to 2,500 to 3,000 and even higher. So I think something below 1,500, but I'm not, you know, I don't think it has to be 900. I think there's families that have, you know, several children, and they can't, it's really hard to live in a 800 square foot home or a 600 square foot home. And so I think being able to go up to 1,500 is something I'd like to see. I'm okay with going up to some extent. And I agree with Mark. I think if we limit the townhomes, we're going to get more big 6,000 square foot single family homes. So I don't, you know, prefer necessarily the townhomes that we have that are big, but I even less prefer a 6,000 square foot single family home when you could have 3 units on a lot, even if they're big. So, you know, I'm afraid if we limit that, we're just going to get more big single family homes. Yeah, I mean, we can try it, see what happens. And, you know, we can talk to the builders, because they're the ones that are going to be doing it. You know, if we limit these townhomes, what are the builders going to say? They're going to say, well, I'm just going to put a 6,000 square foot home up. Yeah, I don't know. Let's ask them. Let's talk to them about it. I think that's, you know, we should get their input on that kind of thing. because they're the ones that are going to build them. And if we say, well, you have to build a smaller townhome, are they going to say, no, we're just not going to do that? That's the thing, we won't build anymore then. We'll just do single family. Gladys?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, Kate. We should be talking, Mayor, we should be talking to builders now, so that, again, you have single families, townhomes, and then you've got this cluster cell of middle code housing. How do we get to the point where, again, they can still build these options, but option 3 is so good and so financially good to them that they're going to want to do more of that. So we can still have all this diverse housing here, or the 2 options of housing. How do we make the diverse housing, the middle code housing, how do we make that just so financially feasible incentives to the point where that's the option folks are going to choose because financially it's the best option for them, or a very good option for them.
At least as good, not worse. Go ahead, Dustin.
Sorry, with the kind of the takeaway item is, I'm getting a sense that you're comfortable moving, narrowing the gap through allowing the housing code or the middle housing code to expand its size, to not be so different. And then it sounds like there's still also interest in at least taking a look or evaluating the townhouse as it sits now, to estimate that. Is that the two options that I'm seeing?
I mean, if we're gonna look
To
at,
gauge the consensus here.
Yeah, Megan?
oh, sorry. Yeah, I guess if we're gonna look at townhome, and this is a whole other thing, but like if people are gonna just flip over to single family, like I wanna look at that too, or I don't know what the mechanisms are, but I'd like to funnel in the right direction instead of we funnel backwards.
And in the development community, that concern that if you're punitive against the townhouses, there's a risk there's a risk of going the opposite way, that we'll get bigger townhouses, we'll just go back to the single family home because we can build the square footage we want. So there's definitely balancing there that we need to be mindful of.
Right. So yeah, so whatever mechanism or multiple mechanisms you guys can figure out as smarter people than us, like funnel towards these missing middle smaller units. I don't know. I'm going to let you figure that out because I don't know.
I think you've got consensus from us, Dustin, now. Don't you kind of have a direction on it?
Yeah, I think that was the funneling through multiple channels, multiple ways, multiple layers.
Okay. And Tim, did you have one more thing?
Yeah, I just want to kind of, I think, reiterate what Mark was saying. I don't want to speak for Mark, but the idea of having carrots with this. I mean, I don't know whether building the $800,000 to $900,000 townhomes is going to solve anything in our community, to be perfectly honest with you. And so we need to be able to figure out a way to get to something that we want. And I guess I just question whether this last discussion is actually going to get us there. So I guess with respect to like consensus, I just want to express my kind of concerns and reservations.
I think it's a beginning. I think this is, a really good start, and the Planning Commission's working on it. And, it's just at a point that they need some input from us. So I think there's going to be a lot more to it when we get done. All right. Is that all you need from us, Dustin?
I got exactly what I needed. Thank you all very much for your time and through wading through this. We'll be back with more information.
Okay.